Good morning, everyone. This is Evan from GMATClub.com. For those of you who are watching this and are on the forum, you might know me as Nightblade354. Today we're going to go over our 132nd question of the day. This is our question of the day series, and this one happens to be critical reasoning. For those of you on the forum, you'll see that this is a 5% low question, meaning it's one of the easiest questions you can receive on the GMAT. And for those of you on the forum and those who have taken it, you can see that our statistics show that this is a question that gets answered correctly about 85% of the time. And it takes about a minute 37 for those who have taken it, about 2,000 attempts. I would say that this question should take you about a minute. There is a trick answer choice in the answer choices below. If you get tripped up, that can drive up your time, but if you are looking for anything in the V37 or above area, you need to get this right in a minute or less. And if you're aiming for 90% accuracy and above on CR, again, a minute or less. For those of you who are part of GMAT Club, there's a subscription button down here that got cut off. I apologize. You can also join our email list. If you are not part of GMAT Club, I highly recommend that you do join. It's a great forum, and I think you'll have a lot of fun on there with all the great explanations and community. With that said, let us dive into this question. By the way, these links are not live, just so everyone's aware, but you can find them on our website. Without further delay, let's dive into the question. The difficulty with the proposed high-speed train line is that a used plane can be bought for 1/3 the price of the train line, and the plane, which is just as fast, can fly anywhere. So this to me seems like context or a premise. We don't know quite yet, but we do know that they're comparing a train line to a plane, so we're going to draw that over here. So just so we're aware, this is our train, this is our plane. And we're going to say that the train costs one whole unit, can be whatever you want. I would go with actual numbers, but 1/3 is kind of difficult to display. And we're going to go 1/3. And in addition, they tell us that it goes equally as fast. So we're going to say the train can go 100 miles an hour, and the plane can go 100 miles an hour. Keeping in mind, this is just what they've given us, so we're going to use this as a comparative drawing just so we keep everything in line and we're clear about what's going on here. Moving on, the train would be a fixed linear system. For those of you who don't know what that means, don't worry about it, just keep reading. And we live in a world that is spreading out in all directions and in which consumers choose the freewheel system, which is cars, buses, and aircraft. We did talk about this, so keep this in mind, which do not have fixed routes. Okay. So this is definitely a premise. And they're basically saying that with a train, well, you're on this track. You can go from point A to point B, or point B to point A. You can't really go over here. But with our plane, well, let's say that we start in Denver. We can then travel to Oklahoma. Yes, I know it's a state to a city. And then from Oklahoma, let's travel to Florida, let's say Miami, and back to Denver. So we can really go any of these directions. We can fly all across the country, so we have a bit more freedom because we don't have these fixed routes. We're not restricted. We can fly all over the country. We can go here to here, here to here, here to here. We can zigzag across. You'd probably get sick, so bring some Dramamine if you take this flight and maybe get a refund. But that's the point that this is trying to make. Thus, this is our conclusion. For those of you who don't know why this is our conclusion, please look up your premises and conclusion indicators. It's really important that you know this, how we can get this question quickly. A sufficient market for the train will not exist. Okay, so they're saying that, yeah, well, it's great that you have a train, it's great you have options, we could care less. Which means, by the way, so that this first thing is our premise as well. We are told that we want to weaken this argument. So keep your eye on the prize here. We are told that we want to weaken this argument that there is no market. Really, we want to say, no, forget this guy. There is a market. So this is what we want to show. So we want to weaken this or strengthen this. Now the reason I know that this is a premise and that this is a premise is because it supports the conclusion. Both these statements support the conclusion. How? Well, first they tell us that the plane is 1/3 the price of the train. They then tell us that the train doesn't really go in any real directions. It goes from point A to point B, whereas our plane can go anywhere. Both these support the fact that there won't be a market for the train. Now, this is a decently weak argument because there are many reasons why you probably want a train over a plane, even with all these factors in here. So one area we can try and weaken, or what they'll provide, is just an an alternate motive, my apologies, where this has this item but this doesn't. Another way they could go about weakening this is if they attack the space in between the premises. Now, they do this on harder, and by that I mean the GMAT or the LSAT, in this case GMAT, do that on more challenging questions because it's a bit more well hidden. On this, I don't necessarily see them doing this. They'll probably attack an assumption in here leading to this, but they'll probably state it outright rather than making you try and parse through this. So with all that said, let us dig through here and see if an answer really speaks to us, because they could go in 15 different directions here. It really is dealer's choice. A. Cars, buses, and planes require the effort of drivers and pilots to guide them, whereas the train will be guided mechanically. Okay, so we have pilots versus a machine. This is the answer choice that can sort of trip you up if you read it too quickly and can drive you to a minute 37. And for high scores, you do not want to do this. You can't do this. So I'm going to put a little squiggly here so we can go back to it, because maybe you're going through it and you're like, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Put a squiggly, put a question mark, do whatever you need to, and come back to it at a later time. We will review this answer choice after we've gone through the rest of these, so don't worry about it. But if you are truly stuck, put a question mark next to it. See if any of the others speak to you. If they do, perfect, circle it, click on it, and move on. But for this purposes, when you're blind reviewing, and if you don't know what I mean by blind review, please see my guide on GMATClub, or Google it for that matter. As we blind review, take all the time you need to break these down so that way you fully understand the question. Answer choice B. Cars and buses are not nearly as fast as high-speed trains will be. So this is wrong mostly because who cares about cars and buses? Our whole point, all of our premises relied on the fact that it's trains versus planes. Yeah, they throw in here cars and buses are part of the free will system, but we don't know anything else. Cars and buses could be 500 times the cost of a train. We don't know. Any assumption you could make to try and justify this could be justified in the opposite manner as well. Well, maybe it costs, maybe a car costs a penny. I hope it wouldn't, because that'd be a lemon, and probably it's gonna blow up when you turn it on. But maybe, maybe not. So too many assumptions to be made here. That's why B is incorrect. C. Planes are not a free will system because they can fly only between airports, which are less convenient for consumers than high-speed train stations would be. Okay, this is pretty good. You need to understand when you're reading this that this is a pretty good weakener. The argument is saying, well, it's great that we're going from point A to point B alone, but point B is where I really want to go. Let's say we have point C here, point D here, and point E here. If my goal is to go from, and just so we have a bit more visual, here's point A and here's point B. If our goal is to get to point B, well, C, D, and E are nice, but we're still going to have to take another route from one of these locations to get to here. Whereas with the train, it's just A to B. That's a perfect answer choice. It hits on an assumption we hadn't considered, which is that maybe you are trying to go from point A to point B, and that C, D, and E just can't get you there, even though they can go all over the map. This hits on that assumption pretty well. This is most definitely an answer choice. At this point, you want to move on. You want to highlight C, maybe look at D and E quickly, but odds are not so much. You're going to want to circle C and move on to a harder question. But because we are blind reviewing, let's look at D. The high-speed train cannot use currently underutilized train stations in large cities. Okay, but this is the opposite of what we're looking for. This strengthens our argument. This does not weaken our argument. It weakens the argument we're trying to make against it, if that makes sense. This just strengthens the fact that yes, don't use trains, use planes. This strengthens this argument. Classic trick on the GMAT and the LSAT. Don't fall for it. Lastly, E, for long trips, most people prefer to fly rather than take ground level transportation. Okay, so again, for long trips, but again, why long trips? We're talking about trips in general. I was talking about most people, which isn't horrible, but we're talking also about prefer. They prefer to fly rather than take ground level transportation. So again, this really strengthens the argument we're not trying to make. It strengthens this. It doesn't weaken this. But beyond that, who cares about a preference? I mean, I love to fly from, or I don't love to fly. I apologize. I don't like flying. So if I have to travel, say, from New Hampshire to Honolulu, if I could drive there, I would, but I can't. So who cares about preferences? They don't really matter. Lastly, going back to A. A is the one that we spoke about in the beginning. It talks about the fact that our wheeled transportation, and it does hit on cars, buses, and planes, so it hits on all three, need drivers to guide them, whereas the train will be guided mechanically. This is wrong for a few reasons. One is that very simply, well, who's to say that a pilot isn't better or worse than a mechanism? So maybe the mechanism is horrible, and for your train, to quote Ozzy Osbourne, you're going off the rails on a crazy train. That would be horrible. Maybe the pilot has 0 errors and will never have an error again, whereas the machine has some weird bugs and is hacked, and, well, guess what? You're a goner at that point. That's the reason why I eliminated this. Now, let's assume, and by the way, I can't take credit for this part of the explanation. Another expert on our forum named GMAT Ninja, who's a very brilliant GMAT taker and a great analytical mind, was going through explanations of this as well and hit on this, which I hadn't assumed or hadn't thought of. But let's assume that our original point that I just made is correct, which is that the machine is never going to mess up. That's a 0, sorry. And let's say our pilot is gonna mess up 10% of the time. So let's assume that this is correct, that this is more flawed. Well, in this, we're making a further assumption. What if this machine that we built, or purchased for that matter, let's say this is the low-end one. Well, maybe the low-end one messes up 15% of the time. But if we invest in the high-end one, then it's going to mess up 0% of the time. Sorry, it's supposed to be a check mark. Let me undo that really quick and put a nice check mark. So let's say I mess up 0% of the time. Well, now we're making a further assumption between these two right here. We're making the assumption that it not only is a person more flawed than a machine, but we're now making a further assumption that all machines aren't equal and that we're investing in the highest end one that's going to make 0 errors versus the one that's going to make 15 errors or 15% of the time, or even 100% of the time, in which case you need your will in place. But we can't make any of these assumptions we just made to fix this answer choice. That's why it's incorrect. The GMAT and the LSAT in particular are going to put stuff in front of you using real-world examples to hit on your real-world knowledge to make you make assumptions you shouldn't make. Do not take any real-world knowledge, with exception of the very basics, into here. Do not assume that a machine is better than a human or a human is better than a machine. The LSAT and the GMAT will tear you apart making those types of assumptions, because it really, really shows that you're not paying attention to the question itself. Use the information available to you. Don't break yourself trying to justify questions and answers when they aren't there to begin with. All that said, If you skipped over A and you knew it was wrong from the beginning, fairly easy answer choice to get to C. It is the easiest type of LSAT question that, GMAT question that you can have from a CR standpoint. It's important to take your time and to get them right. It's also important that you speed through without dumb errors and get these questions right in the first place. By the way, this is our question of the day for October 13th. We will be publishing more of these videos and more questions of the day moving forward. So please subscribe, and I hope you enjoyed this explanation.